I mean, maybe I'm like reading between the lines here, but this is saying that like apartments are going to see a lot of growth, meaning that good investment, good to buy.
The demand might slow down for houses simply because it's unaffordable.
You get to a point where you go, okay, maybe it's time for a bit more space.
Talk about the quarter acre block. That used to be the Australian dream, right? I don't know. I'm not convinced that is the Australian dream anymore.
Welcome back to Property Now, where we are on a mission to make you the property pro in your group chat. Today, me and the guys sit down to ask ourselves the age-old question, apartments or houses, which is better to buy? Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode because we drop a pretty exciting Property Now exclusive. Enjoy. All right, guys, let's get into this week's topic.
Just very quickly.
Talk to me.
Where's your cup gone?
What cup? Oh, my keep cup?
Your
my environmentally made from recycled plastic keep cup? Yeah.
Recyclable or not recyclable?
Not here
Reusable.
today.
Hey, watch out. You only got one good arm. She could break the other one.
Yes, for anyone not watching, definitely pop over to YouTube or do the video player thing on Spotify. Chris has broken his arm.
Yeah, I did.
At an auction, right?
Just throwing your paddle up.
Stop putting your arm up. No, look, I'd love to say I have a really great story to tell, but
you can make one up.
It's I was playing tip with my daughter, and running away. It was a rainy Saturday morning, and decided to jump on the couch to try and get away from her, and fell off the couch and broke my arm.
Dear.
The photo of you that you sent after you broke your arm in your sling, I use that with my kids. I'm like, do you want to know what Chris did? And they're like, what, Dad? And I'm like, he jumped on the lounge. That's why I always say never jump on the lounge.
That's smart. That's
so my
smart.
kids haven't jumped on the lounge since, so thank you very much for taking one for the team.
My daughter felt so bad. She's like, Dad, are you okay? I'm like, I can't believe you broke my arm, Madison. She's like, no. And then she backtracks. She's like, oh, no, you broke your own arm. I'm like,
good on her.
I didn't do that.
Go, Maddie.
Like, all right,
It's my clumsy dad. Oh, well, good on you for being here. We push through. I reckon if I broke my arm, I'd probably take a couple of days off. Like, that's ouchies.
Yeah, I've
never
Sunday
broken
off.
anything.
That's it.
Sunday off. God, you're good. All right. Anyways, aside from that, let's get into the show. So today we are talking about apartments or houses and which is better to buy. I think it is like, especially as someone who's looking to buy property, I say this every episode. Sorry, guys. Until I buy property, I'm going to say it every episode. And then I'll say, as someone who's recently bought property, blah, blah, blah.
And we'll celebrate.
And we'll be very excited.
Champagne.
I digress. So, yeah, I think apartments or houses is a big question. And it kind of makes me think back to the episode we did last week where it was, regional or metro, where is better to buy? Where is a better place to buy? This week, we're now talking about what's the better, stock to buy. I guess the question is quite subjective because I think it depends, if you're looking to live in it yourself, then you're going to have different considerations. If you're looking for an investment, and again, depending on the area that you're buying in, what we spoke about last week.
And your budget, Zaz.
And your budget. Oh, my God, there's a long list. But hopefully we will get into all of that today, all the different factors and things that you need to kind of consider. And the reason why this topic has come up for us is because, Jace, you shared a stat that was in the Australian Housing Outlook report for 2024 to 2025. That was published by QBE. And I think it came out quite recently. I actually didn't check the date of that, but I assume it was recent.
I think so too, but it did say from 2022 to 2025 though, so it might have come out.
Already halfway through it.
A bit older, but it was interesting looking at it, in retrospect as well. So it's got a bit of history and a couple of years of predictions.
Yeah, so that I think the main thing that jumped out to us was that apartment growth is predicted at 23% against houses as 16%. So, potentially that, this is predicting into the future, but looking at kind of where we are now and where we're going to be, apartments are maybe I'm like reading between the lines here, but this is saying that like apartments are going to see a lot of growth, meaning that good investment, good to buy. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Look, it's supply and demand, right? So if there's going to be growth, that means there'll be more demand for it. And, it's probably based on the shortage of supply as well, that the supply is not going to change in a couple of years' time.
Yeah.
With the increase increasing demand for affordable apartments. Especially, I think there was an article just this week how houses are now super unaffordable. I think it was from the Domain. It takes almost 60% of a couple's income to service the mortgage repayments on an average house for about $930,000 in Sydney, for a couple earning an average income, right, between the ages of 25 to 34 years old. Yeah. So, but the other thing is, even if you could afford 60% of your income for your repayments, it talks about you can't even get the loan.
Why is that?
Because of the borrowing capacity challenges at the moment.
Right.
Right. So people, let's say you're super good at budgeting, you're very frugal, you're all right to put away 60% of your take-home pay for your mortgage payments. You can't even get the loan.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the banks assess your ability to pay back or for the loan at 9 to 10%. Right? So they're just getting smashed everywhere. So I think that's where it's pointing to the increased demand for apartments.
Yeah.
That's interesting, Jason. I think talking on the supply-demand part, so are you saying that you think apartments are going to grow faster? When I say grow, capital grow faster than houses because of the supply-demand issues that are happening at the moment?
Yeah, I do think so, because I think the demand might slow down for houses simply because it's unaffordable. Right. So especially for first home buyers. So that article from the Domain basically talks about it's impossible for a first home buyer to consider a house, an average house in a capital city.
In a capital city,
right? It's highlighted Sydney as the example, but all the capital cities have similar situations where it's between 40-something% of your take-home pay goes to the mortgage repayment if you were to buy a house on the average price. And this is based on a 20% deposit, by the way. So I know we do talk about 5% deposit, this and that. That means you're going to need an even bigger loan. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's going to affect the demand for houses.
And is that where the potential growth in apartments over houses comes? Because people, they can't afford the house, so they're forced to look at, budget-wise, they're forced to look at the apartment. Especially Sydney, maybe even Melbourne. I don't know about the other capitals, but certainly in the big ones.
Probably more so Brisbane than Melbourne, I would say.
Even Brisbane. Yeah. Well, Brisbane has overtaken Melbourne. Yeah.
Like since COVID, all the internal migration, everyone's come from particularly Victoria to Queensland and even New South Wales. Yeah. So that's really made the prices in Brisbane more unaffordable in terms of house prices than in Melbourne itself.
Yeah. So I guess you're saying, if I can't afford the $1.5 million house, I need to look at a cheaper apartment, and more people are having to look at that option, and that's why you could see apartments grow a bit more.
But isn't that just going to make houses more unaffordable and more expensive? So if the supply and demand issue is affecting apartments and more people are going to go into apartments, won't that affect the actual prices of houses? Therefore, meaning houses, if you can crack into it, become a better investment because there's going to be longer term capital growth in houses.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. But I wonder if you don't have as many qualified buyers, you're going to have less demand for the property for houses, right? But that could make it, I think at the moment, Zaz shared as part of her notes that the price gap between apartments and houses are widening.
Yeah, very wide.
And so does it become like a thing where, only when you're very wealthy with a lot of financial support from parents or family and so forth, that in the future, say in 10 years' time, you'll be someone that can afford a house?
It's a great point.
It's heading that way.
Yeah, it's a great point. There are suburbs where the difference between a good-sized apartment and a bottom of the entry-level house is like $1 million plus difference.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of change, So and I think that's probably due to like you say, housing or land is probably always more. People want the bigger house.
I think generally,
right?
there's a history that people have wanted houses over apartments. The open space and whatnot. But then I look at some of the apartment developments that are being done at the moment, particularly in Victoria, in Sydney. They're not just slap up a block and that's it. So there's some real amazing communities that some of the larger developers are building where, there is 1,000 or 2,000 apartments, but they're building amenities that go with it, shops. It's around great amenities such as stations, like for travel perspectives, schools.
Yeah.
I think that's really important about the apartment living that, I know we talk about affordability a lot, and that to me is the number one factor, whether you choose a house or apartment. It boils down to affordability as the number one factor. Yeah. But then there's other factors that come into play, whether you choose an apartment or house.
Well, there's no doubt density has advantages.
Absolutely.
Whereas more space has advantages as well. So if I'm living in an apartment, few blocks around, there's cafes, I can walk to the train station. That's amazing. If I'm living in a house, I probably have to drive to those things.
Yep.
But the benefit is I've got a backyard, my kids can play, maybe I can get a swimming pool, maybe we've got a spare bedroom. So there's probably pros and cons to both.
And there are, particularly coming out recently, there are a lot of talks about the cons with urban sprawl. And so what urban sprawl means is the widening of cities, and as we push out further and further into different locations to effectively build houses. There are planning issues that come with urban sprawl, expanding a city, such as you need to build the infrastructure, the roads, you need to build new schools, you need to make sure that, there's locations where people can go to great open spaces and parks and whatnot. So there's all those factors. Whereas if you have, and there's a lot of global examples of well-built and well-located density where that can have great planning outcomes. And there's a less reliance on public transport, for example, when you can have great density, or there's more reliance rather on public transport and greater connectivity with amenities if there's greater density in an area.
Do you have any examples internationally?
Yes, Singapore is actually a great example of where land is so scarce. So they need every, I suppose, metre of land needs to be planned out really effectively. And density has been used in a great way there. So has, the Housing Development Board, I believe it is, that operates in Singapore, really ensuring that home ownership is a priority. I think the home ownership rates are about 90% in Singapore, which is amazing. And this is not something that they've done overnight. This has been since the 60s, where they've had to implement policies and procedures, particularly relating to planning and how government incentivises people to get into property. And it is done a bit differently. It's on 99-year leases, for example. But that's an example of where well-planned and thought-out density can lead to better planning outcomes. And I'm not a town planner by any means, but looking at the well-located density can actually provide greater outcomes. As you said, Michael, you've got access to cafes in those local areas. You've got access to transport. You can get anywhere within 5 or 10 minutes. I think that's a great outcome. There's always access to green space, which is really important, as opposed to living in houses where you need to drive to everywhere, and the backyard side of things.
Especially now, and I speak for Sydney, right? And this is changing already, but in the last couple of decades, a lot of the urban sprawl, it hasn't been like quarter-acre blocks.
No.
It's been much smaller blocks. So all of a sudden, we've seen a lot of these suburbs with like cookie-cutter homes and like very small backyards where you can't even kick a football.
But you can open the window on the side and touch your neighbour's house. Sometimes they're that close to the
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can.
There's some that...
So no, Jason, you seem excited by that. You seem excited
Sorry,
by that.
that came out the wrong way.
Not the bathroom windows, thank God.
Can we cut that?
Cut a peach, clip a peach. No, but so, and I think we're heading in the wrong direction. But thankfully that has changed, where now you're starting to see a lot of the outer communities, you're seeing a mixture of apartments, townhouses, houses. Yep. Hopefully the blocks aren't, these little 300 square metre blocks, because at the end of the day, then you're getting these, if you're having small homes without the convenience of what comes with density, then, it's not the Australian dream at all. You probably
What is the Australian dream? I think the Australian, and we're talking about apartments versus houses, I think the Australian dream has shifted. You talk about the quarter-acre block. That used to be the Australian dream, right? I don't know. I'm not convinced that is the Australian dream anymore.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it needs an update.
I think the Australian dream is just to bloody buy a property.
Yeah. I feel like as well, I think the preference is shifting a little bit, especially with, off the back of COVID, when everyone was locked down and working from home. Like, that's the first thing myself and my partner thought is like, we've got to get out of Sydney. Like, why are we stuck in our tiny little unit if we can't leave the house or can't go anywhere? Like, having a backyard in that sort of scenario would have been amazing, or being close to the beach or somewhere more remote that, you could enjoy nature and get outside. Now that, the world is or has mostly returned to normal, and, people are back in hybrid work or back in the office full time, number one, the commute, if you've, moved to somewhere where you're in a larger block, which I can relate to right now, or even just, you don't need all that space anymore, because if you're in the office all the time, then the upkeep that you need to do on that property is just like adding to your plate. So I think like I never thought that I would be like excited to live in an apartment because I was very lucky to grow up with, you know, my family home had a huge backyard and we were outside all the time. And like as a little girl, I thought I cannot wait to do that exact same thing for my kids one day because, you know, it's so amazing to have that space. Now that I'm like, oh, this is the real world, I'm like, a big backyard means I got to do a lot of yard maintenance or pay someone to do it for me or something. Now I'm like, I get the apartment thing. It's super convenient. You know, there's a lot of pros to it. And I think that like, you think, oh, you're living in such close proximity to other people, but it's actually also a really nice thing, assuming that you have good neighbours, which I've also been lucky to have.
It probably depends on what stage of life you're at or your personal situation. So a young couple, like yourself and your partner, like for you guys, man, apartment, great. Get up, go for a walk, have a coffee.
Don't you take the bins out?
Don't take the bins out. You know, Maz doesn't have to mow the lawn. Like, that's fantastic.
I don't think he would anyway. No, he would outsource that so quickly.
That's a weekend routine for so many people.
But that's great.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, that's amazing too. Like I'm not saying, you know, if we had the means to have the house with the backyard and the pool and the this and the that, like it would also be a lifestyle change because then we'd be able to entertain people more often or have people around. And we still do that, but it's, you know, sitting in our living room and we're a bit more like, you know, confined to a smaller space. But I definitely see the pros and cons of both for sure.
So could you put it this way? You know, we're talking about the Australian dream needs a bit of an update because for me, I feel that there's this, obsession with owning a house.
Like pressure almost.
Correct. So that's why the media stories or news articles always talks about how hard it is to buy a house.
Yeah.
So this one I referenced from the domain just talking about how hard it is to buy a house for a first home buyer.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's so many first home buyers who bought a townhouse. So many of them bought a villa. So many of them bought an apartment.
Yeah.
And maybe their second or third house as they moved on their life stages, they got a house.
It's like a stepping stone.
Yeah,
right?
but because there's that obsession, you know, I think it can make people who are looking to buy feel inadequate because that they think that the expectation is you got to get a house, but I can't get a house. Now this is bad. Everything's hard.
I think that's because apartments and apartment living is a relatively new phenomenon in Australia.
Yeah.
So there are in high dense parts of Asia or even parts of Europe, like it's very normal to live in an apartment.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of like buyers that come from overseas that come to Australia, they go straight to the apartments because that's what they're used to and that's what they understand. Whereas, you know, for our parents' generation, they didn't buy apartments. They bought old houses and then they built up to bigger houses or whatever,
so
you know. Whereas the now generation, we're not building up from an old fibro house into a bigger brick house and then that's our family house forever. We're starting with the apartment into a townhouse, into a bigger house. So that's just the stage of our life. And even you look at areas across Australia, like for Sydney, apartment living is quite normal. But if you were living in Adelaide or Perth, like they probably wouldn't look at apartments at all as something that is very normal. So it's something that we're just getting used to. And all the amenity that comes with it. Like, you know, we've seen a big shift recently as well with NIMBYism, not in my backyard, to YIMBYism, yes, in my backyard. People want vibrant communities and that comes from density. But yeah, again, there's nothing wrong with starting with an apartment and aspiring to buy a house, or perhaps an apartment is for you. You know, if it's just yourself, a partner, puppy dog or one kid or whatever, maybe an apartment's great.
Yeah.
But I do think like as families grow, then that's when you need to start looking at other options and go, okay, well, like where's the space?
That's a good point as well when you talk about families growing. I think people are having less kids now as well.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Well, again, cost of living.
Yeah.
And families are making decisions based on, if we have more kids, then we're going to need a bigger space. So they're actually making decisions based on that.
Exactly. They're having less kids.
Yeah.
And then you talk about the 24 to 34-year-olds, the case, where 60% of their income. Yeah. That's usually the age bracket, probably even up to 40. That's usually the age bracket where people are having kids now.
Oh, absolutely.
And if they can't afford that expensive property with the backyard,
and imagine that,
then you get to your 40s having a backyard without the kids there. Like it's a bit. So, are you buying it for the grandkids?
Yeah, exactly.
It's true. Yeah. So should builders and developers be building 4-bedroom apartments?
Well, I don't know if it's about I think of me and my family. I don't know if it's necessarily about the actual space inside the house, about the bedrooms. I think it's more about, particularly for the kids, it's like the outside area. So I think if we can have better planning outcomes to ensure that maybe there's more green space included, or more parks located around that area. Like if there is high density in an area, green space needs to be one of the top priorities that's included as part of that, because it's generally going to be, given where prices are, it's generally going to be a young family that's living in an apartment.
Yeah.
Maybe one or sometimes two kids who should have access to some green space around their dwellings to take the kids for a walk or to get out of the house. I think that's actually really the important part. They're not necessarily buying those $1 to $3 million properties with the backyard because they can't afford them.
We just wanted to say a quick hello to all the new listeners that have checked out Property Now in the last week. It is a pleasure to have you here. If you've been enjoying the pod, make sure you follow us so that you never miss an episode.
Yeah, and that's a good point with the green space because, for example, near where I live, they've got like a few apartments and they've got this new dog park and they've got a really good kids playground as well. So every time I drive by, not shooting, but every time I drive by...
Where do you live?
Man, like everyone's out, all their dogs are out, their kids are playing. So that also contrasts, for example, if you got two kids or one child or whatever playing in the backyard by themselves in the house. Man, like it's a real sense of community
and
because of the master planning.
And you don't see that really further out. I know growing up, so I grew up out west. We didn't play, like they'd have little parks.
Oh man, they just had one swing bar.
But no one ever played there.
And the slippery dip
because you didn't have to.
Yeah.
No one played in those parks. Whereas where I live now, it's more in the west. It's, there are families living in apartments, there are families living in smaller spaces, but every park is
That's
chockers,
a nice point.
man.
I like that. I never really thought it because I don't have kids, so I don't really go to kids' playgrounds. That would be weird.
That would be weird,
But
awkward.
that's super
I go there
nice.
with my kids, I don't go there by myself.
You go to the dog park without your dog.
Okay.
Takes his cat for it.
No, but that's very interesting because
why don't they have cat parks? Anyway, that's another story.
Those parks back then,
They make their own
man,
park.
they had nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Like the council parks.
Oh yeah, one swing, one scary slide that you didn't want to go
down. The
down.
equipment was terrible, but now I see parks from all these councils. They just built this new park, revamped this park, and you look at the equipment. There's like water parks in there.
The parks are mad. It's
They're
like Wet
so
n Wild,
good.
Australia's
The water
Wonderland.
park edition's been a great one.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Like all the families are there having picnics, kids all playing around. It's all free.
Yeah.
Man.
We should do a podcast episode on like best parks in Sydney and where to buy.
And then you drop
Based
it
on
with a
that.
bit of asbestos bark around.
Actually, there was
Where did you get
asbestos.
that from?
There was asbestos
That Roselle,
found.
that Roselle.
That's where
There's been
I've
a few
been personal
schools and a few-
training.
Yeah, right.
At that park.
Yeah, yeah.
My sister's been training there for years. They just segue.
Yeah.
But yeah, they found asbestos in the soil, I guess.
In the bark, apparently.
In the bark.
Mulch,
Jeez.
the mulch of the bark. Anyway,
Anyways.
not very good. Yeah.
We segue.
So
those
houses or
parks.
apartments?
I have a question. So based on that stat we talked about at the start, if demand for apartments is going up, and this might seem obvious, but does that mean that and we say apartments are good because affordability, more people can afford apartments than houses right now. But if demand is going up for apartments, then their prices are going to be driven up as well.
Yeah.
So then affordability will also become an issue for apartments.
Well, I think what's going to happen is, so if you can only afford a $500,000 or $600,000 mortgage, so $650 purchase price, more than likely you're going to be looking at an apartment living, and that comes down to that affordability demand. What can I afford? If that's what you can get in terms of lending, chances are you're going to be looking at an apartment. Yeah. And the pool of buyers looking for that same apartment is larger because the demand is there and there's going to be a greater pool of people that can afford that same property. Yeah. And I think what you're trying to get at, Zaz, is that do you think that the apartment prices will then lift up because there's a greater pool of buyers looking for that same property?
Because there's not as much demand for houses potentially in that, price range or in that
the reality
buyer pool.
is yes, there will be a greater price increase. And I think then particularly for the next 2 to 3 years, it then comes back to what Jason was saying about supply. And we all know the supply issues that Australia is going through with being able to build and deliver new dwellings. So that's just going to put further price increases on apartments, price pressure.
But I think the reason the prediction that we allude to at the start that came about, like apartments rising faster than houses, is because houses have traditionally grown much faster than apartments to the point where there's a massive gap in between. So the prediction comes from a theory that I guess the apartments need to start to catch up a little bit, right? And because they're more affordable, there's more people in that market, it makes a lot of sense that they will start to move a little bit faster in the short term so that they can catch up. But eventually what can happen is the apartments become more expensive at a faster rate, then all of a sudden houses become attractive again. right? So the houses start to move up. So it's this big cycle. So I think you gotta be very careful when you're looking at houses v apartments, is to look at a long-term view. And as a short-term view, potentially you can make some money in apartments because they probably will grow faster, possibly, right? Not financial advice, issues, right? Because of supply issues.
Yeah.
But in the long term, again, it's like people want space. And that is always going to be the case, I believe, right? So that and as there are more apartments and less houses, they're going to become more scarce. Like bigger land is going to be...
I don't know if it's space anymore. I don't know if that's the main criteria for people these days. I mean, again, we're not generalising on behalf of everybody. I know we don't like generalising.
Hey, I love space.
Maybe that's not the primary factor anymore. Maybe it's like convenience as well is becoming a big factor. And
I
location.
think so.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
Like, I don't want to drive an hour and a half to my workplace anymore. Like, I think that's becoming a really big factor.
And that's a great point. I was speaking to someone on the weekend, and she's a school teacher near where I live, but she lives out southwest. And she said, I'm selling my house and I'm buying a 2-bedroom apartment to be close to work. But that's the difference again. It's budget-wise. So in terms of budget, selling a house to buy an apartment. So again, these are the things you got to sort of look at.
Because when you've got the house, you tend to, I don't know, personal experience, you tend to stay home more because you've got the backyard and whatnot. But when you're in a smaller space, you tend to be using that for, having dinner, watching TV, making love to your wife, whatever it is, and then leaving.
Wow.
You're really coming out.
Okay, someone's feeling romantic.
Whale's broken. Babe, if you're listening, get ready. No.
Clip a page.
That's a short.
No, but like, my point is...
Kids go to the park. Sorry.
All right, so the real story how I broke it down. I think you tend to get out of your dwelling more. Focus. We tend to get out of our dwelling more. I'm talking to myself, by the way. Like, you tend to get out of your dwelling more, and you might go visit family, or you might go to an open space, you might go to that water park. Like, so it actually, and then that forces you to interact with other humans and create a community.
Who wants to interact?
No, I think what we like personally, what we saw during COVID, and this is going way off track. Like, I think people longed for that human connection again.
Definitely.
COVID, right? So
I was the chattiest girl ever. Every time I could go to I think you could only go to, what was it? You go to like a pharmacist or supermarket, like one person a day, one person from one household could go to a supermarket, and I would be there for like 10 minutes.
I actually knew who my neighbours were.
Yeah.
Like, it was fantastic.
So nice.
And now but like, I think
like
that's
stupid neighbours.
What a beautiful time.
Well, okay, yeah, sorry. It was bad. It was a terrible time. But you have to see the good in things.
Yeah,
and
true.
that was a nice side effect of a very shitty, situation is that, I did know my neighbours. And if anybody needed a hand with something, again, I was living in an apartment at the time. If anybody needed anything, like we had a little WhatsApp group and people would leave meals, like people would take the lift down and leave a meal at the door. And we don't do that shit anymore because the world is back to normal. But it was a really nice thing that came out of it.
I think my point I'm going to get at, like, I agree, Zaz. I think it's the community element for the apartments. I think there's a greater chance of creating a community with more density, of course.
And do you reckon there's a greater community element because of things like Facebook groups? Because that's something that never existed.
Yeah.
I think 20 years ago when you live in an apartment or you lived in like an area, like a community.
Shout out to 5 Dog Family.
Yeah, right.
My apartment building has a WhatsApp group.
Yeah, right. Stuff like that. So that's really
live.
helping people connect a lot better.
Yeah.
I reckon because of social media and the way that people communicate.
Yes.
So now you can, post a video of someone's dog doing a poo on the front lawn, for example, if they don't own up to it.
Yeah. Whose dog?
Whose
dog keeps shitting in my front
I'm giving you one day to hand yourself in before I post the video.
That's why we don't buy houses, because then you have a dog crapping on your lawn. So that's
one
one point for don't buy a house.
Where I live now, people walking dogs all the time, everywhere.
Yeah.
Where I used to live, didn't have to walk dogs. They just crapped in the backyard. They ran around the backyard. It was fine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so anyway.
Okay, so that's another point. That's a point on the don't buy houses, or no, don't buy apartments. I'm trying to do the tally of what we think we should buy.
I think the very first thing is like the very first point, and I think we all agree what the main point is for houses versus apartment is affordability.
Yeah.
If you can afford a house or an apartment, I think there's that way up between. Like I think if you can afford both, most people would probably look to the houses just based off historic data, what's happened historically. They're not making land anymore, as they say. Like I think people know that the growth over the long term in houses will be greater than apartments.
Yeah.
But
Is that a generalisation?
Is that maybe it is? Is it more to do with location than stock type? So I'll give you a real life example, and I've shared this with you guys in the past, but I don't think I've shared it on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But quite a few years ago now, we purchased a 4-bedroom home in southwestern Sydney. At the same time when we were looking to make this purchase, we were also looking at a 2-bedroom apartment in Drummoyne. So anyone not in Sydney, southwest, Drummoyne is more inner, closer to the city. Mm-hmm. Southwest, further out from the city. So 4-bedroom home in southwest Sydney, 2-bedroom apartment in Drummoyne, same price. What was the price? I forget at the time. It was probably about $500,000 at the time. So you could buy both for the same price. We sold that house probably about 7 years later, and funnily enough, the 2-bedroom apartment in Drummoyne was for sale at the same time that we were selling that 4-bedroom house, and they both sold for the same price. So during that time, they both grew the exact same amount from the exact same base. The stock types were different, but the location was very different.
That's the big factor.
So there's I guess what I'm saying is it's not always just about apartments v houses. It's about budget, but it's about location.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And also, how close it is to transport,
exactly,
lifestyle,
employment.
Employment with what you're talking about. Because sometimes if you want to live close to the train station, they're not going to knock down a house and build another house and then sell that. Yeah. You're going to have apartments. So if you really want a house that's part of the urban sprawl, that's new community, you're going to have to go out.
Yep.
All right. So that's just how it is. And maybe some people don't want that. Yes, they're happy to sacrifice not having a house, but have better convenience and location. Because for me, every time I see a new apartment finish in the area that I live, I get really excited because I'm like, what shops or cafes
are going to be open?
Are going to be coming
dogs
in?
are shitting on my lawn now.
Right? On the ground floor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And boom, there'd be like 2 cafes, a new restaurant. And this is awesome.
It is true.
Yeah. And it's
such a yimby.
It's really good.
Backyard,
yeah.
Jace.
Yeah, but I like that as well. Like, if again, I always talk about the kids element. If you want your kids to live close to you all around you, I mean, initially they're probably going to start off in a unit, Jace. Like, if you're still in that house in 20 years' time and the kids grow up, you're going to want them to, if you do want them to be around you, they're probably going to be, if you do, they're probably going to live in an apartment. I mean, unless they're, in that time, probably spending $5 million on a house.
Yeah.
Dude, my kids are going to be living with me till they're 45, I reckon.
with 5 investment properties of their own in Perth.
Yeah. So true.
It's so funny.
Well, I think when we come back to the original question, apartments or houses, which is better to buy, it again makes me think of a point you made last week, Jace, where it's like, it's kind of not that simple, but that question is perhaps a really good intro question to ask to a mortgage broker or, someone, a financial advisor, when you are considering what property you're going to purchase, because it could help you kind of uncover what your goals are, what values are important to you, what you're looking for in a property. Are you looking for access to amenities, a property that's really easy to maintain, it's close to your work, or do you really want to have, the space so that you can, spend your time at home? And it really depends on what you're looking for in a property. So it's not as simple as you should do this or you should do this. Unfortunately, sorry everybody listening, but it's a good question to ask yourself and to, talk about with your friends, talk about with, people that might own property around you to help you uncover what matters to you.
I think talking on this point, I think nearly every episode we talk about goals and what are your property goals. But then on the same front, we also, last week we had region versus metro or urban, and today we've got house versus apartment. I think it's very clear that we're not going to come out and sit and say, yep, you should be buying in regional.
No.
That's not what we're here to do.
You should buy an apartment.
Exactly. we're not here to say you should buy an apartment and you should buy a house and you should buy regional versus urban. I think we're here to unpack it all and to look at the positives and negatives. And I think that's what I actually love about this show and our discussion, that we don't just come out and say go buy apartments or go buy houses, because you obviously, we can't give that advice, number one, but number two, you need to look at your personal goals and your personal circumstances to see what best suits you.
Right? I love that you're saying this, because we had a comment in YouTube. Someone said that we're typical property spruikers, and I'm like, there is no way.
That can be
then you hear a comment like that, and
don't get me wrong, we love property, and if people are asking me about what they should invest in, I'm probably going to say property. right? And call that a spruik or not. But we're not going to say where to buy or what to buy or what
No.
type to. You need to
Buy
look
my
at your
house.
personal circumstances.
Buy my house, please.
If I had a property, I'd totally spruik it, but I don't. Come for me, YouTube. No, I get what
Clip
you're
it,
saying.
Paige.
Yeah. We love property. Of course, we're
We
going to
should
talk
use
about
that
property.
as a comment on that YouTube.
Yeah.
On that YouTube.
Yeah, like I mean, the show
Come
is
for
called
me.
Property Now, right?
It's called property now. If you don't want to hear property being spruiked, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like we love property, but I think the what it comes down to is your personal circumstance. Like if
Yeah.
you're a couple and you never plan to have kids, then maybe that house or that quarter acre
Yeah.
block isn't for
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
'Cause
Exactly
what do
right.
you really need a backyard for unless you love motorbikes or something, whatever it is,
Or you want heaps of dogs.
right?
Yeah.
You don't
Look,
know.
if it was just me and my wife, man, apartment all day
Oh,
long.
same.
I agree.
Man, I talk
Completely.
about that with my wife,
Yeah.
that when the kids have moved out, I'm going to sell the place and then go find a really nice apartment in
Yeah.
an amazing location, has all the amenities that I need.
All the bells and whistles.
Right. And
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
just, all we need is maybe one extra room for the grandkids potentially. But man, I can't wait to go
It's-
live
it's
somewhere
fun-
more
it's
convenient.
It's funny when you
downsizing,
think
mate.
about that.
downsizing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
funny when you mention that. I was the first year we got married. My wife was begging me to like go live in the city for a year, like just to have that experience. And I'm like we didn't do it because in my head I'm like, if we go to the city, we're never going to be able to leave.
Yeah.
I know my wife was
Yeah.
like, we'll never be able to get out of there, right? But I look back now and I'm like, it would have been good to do that year and just see what
Yeah.
it would
You'd
have been
be
Oh, that
just
would've
fast forward to now, you with your 4 kids
My
in a
dad-
2-bedroom
My
apartment.
dad did
Like,
that.
break it
He
up.
did the city.
In the city.
Yeah.
like. Right? Like it'd be a freak show.
Don't jump on the lounge. It's the only lounge that we have.
Don't jump on the lounge. You'll fall off the
You
balcony.
fall off the
Like,
balcony.
That's the trampoline, Dad. Yeah.
Oh man.
So
But yeah, it is true. But I think that's a good point too, and that is actually good advice. Like take advantage of your point in life.
situation.
Yeah, if you're a young couple, go and experience the city lifestyle, because when you have, and I'm at a point now where I've got kids and my kids are growing up and my son, and we've got, beautiful big 3-bedroom townhouse, to be honest, 2 courtyards. But my son is 5 and he's like, Dad, I want to go run around outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got to take him down to the park to do that. Like you get to a point where you go, okay, maybe it's time for a bit more space.
But it could go back to go experience the regions as well. If you're a couple with no kids, go experience the regions. Go live on a beach somewhere and like live that life. Go live
More
in a
and more
remote
of my
area. Like,
friends want
Yeah.
to
You've
got
do
freedom
that
to do
that.
at
Yeah,
this
right.
That's true.
age. Yeah.
Especially those that can take advantage of, remote working and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
No, that's
Definitely,
amazing.
You're seeing a
Yeah.
lot of that
Yeah.
too.
Totally.
so I think that it's interesting. The topic: are apartments or houses better?
Yeah, which is better to buy?
What's better? Are we talking like? Because it's not necessarily we're talking in the terms of what's going to grow in capital. I think we've talked a lot today about lifestyle
Yeah.
and your personal situation.
so
And I
true.
think that's like this. We're not always talking about where you're going to make the most money, right?
No.
I think it's also comes into what your situation is and where you want to live and what experiences that you want to go through as well.
Yeah.
And do you want to drive an hour to work or do you want to be 10 minutes away from work?
It's such a good point, because when you frame the question, you think it's a financial question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But none of us have really, we've touched on finance and growth and things like that, but we've all spoken about lifestyle, and yeah, it's so true, Chris, so true.
I think for me as well personally, when you talk about property, and if you I always talk about property with a long-term view. So when you talk about property with a long-term view, my opinion is over 10 to 15 years, they're all going to grow at some. Yes, there's going to be houses.
Not
that
financial
grow,
advice.
like they're going to grow.
Not property spooking.
No,
Right. They're all going to grow, but
They're
at
all going to
different
double
rates.
No, anyway, sorry.
They're all going to double every 7 to 8 years. Right? Like,
Yeah. It's guaranteed.
they're all going to grow at certain rates.
I'm going to get myself in trouble for this episode.
Come
I
at
can
me,
feel
YouTube.
it.
I love it. That was the
Come
best.
at me, Asic.
But like,
Don't
you know
come
what?
at me, Essie,
If
please.
people don't think so, like show us the data. Like show us where it
Yeah.
hasn't grown. And like give us 20 years ago. Show
Yep.
me an area that hasn't grown, whether that's
Yeah.
houses or apartments. We'd love to see it. Apart from like a remote freaking mining town, we get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An urban area that hasn't had experienced
Yeah.
capital
Yeah.
growth. Like I think we all know where it's gone. That's what's probably led us into some of the difficulties about affordability right now and how
Yep.
difficulties to buy.
So right now, your stage in life, like I just alluded to before, wife, 4 kids, what is better? What do you think is better for you,
Mate,
for your
wife and 4
situation?
kids, we're borderline going to check into a zoo.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because that's just what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot
But
of energy
we,
in that
like
house.
we need the space, right? Like
Yeah.
I've got 4
Yeah.
young kids. We need the space. There's just,
Yeah.
it is what it is. So in where I am right now, it's got to be a house. I can't go into a 2 or even 3-bedroom apartment
No.
because, yeah, the kids will be all over each other.
What about you, He-Man?
Mate, that's an interesting one. 2 kids. Mate, we could be in an apartment. Like, we're in a house at the moment. But, yeah, like, if we've got 3 bedrooms, decent sized bedrooms, and with what you're talking about, like we don't use the backyard that much, and we have a tiny backyard.
Just to cut the
it's
grass.
a house, yeah.
You use the backyard just to cut the
Man, there's not much, and like the kids go outside and do a bit of cartwheels and stuff, but they're not always playing outside in the backyard as well. And also, when they play, you need to play with them in the backyard. So that's
really. How old are your girls?
I've got a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like they like the parents to be there. You know, like they can play independently, but I think they get a lot more joy. So
that's a generational thing too, man. My parents rarely played with
Never.
us.
Oh man,
It was like go.
my parents weren't even there.
Go.
Nah, never.
Yeah.
Never.
Disappear. We'll see you later.
Yeah, you ride your bike out, come home before it's dark. They don't even know where you went, right?
Yeah.
So would you say apartment or house?
Yeah.
You reckon apartment?
Man, I think both.
Both.
Yeah, both. Like I wouldn't
like
have
that
any
answer.
like a particular preference or priority to say that, you know, a house will suit us better.
But both could work.
Both would work because, you know, the apartment will have, you know, could potentially have greater facilities.
Yeah.
You know, like a pool,
Hmm.
a gym, so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah.
You know, convenience. You know, the house has its pros as well. You know, it's easier to have people come over.
Your Pilates, Jace? When are you into your Pilates?
Pilates is great. What about you, Michael?
What about you, Mike?
Look, I'm at my stage in life, so we've done the move closer to the city, closer to work, and we've experienced that. Our family's growing, and so for us, I will say, like personally, we're looking at how can we get into a bigger space, you know, and where does that have to be? So for us, we're at that next stage where maybe we've done the not apartments, but we've done the townhouse close to the city, but like, I'm
craving more space
I'm
now?
craving some space. Yeah, I'm craving some space personally. So that's as a personal thing, and we'll I don't know, maybe we unpack that in another episode, like making that decision, like, because I'd be happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
But the main reason for that is, and I'll tell you guys now, is that like my wife's pregnant. We're about to have another baby. I haven't told anyone yet. I'm going to drop it on the podcast.
Okay,
I was gonna say-
when you just said my family's growing, I was about to be like, your family's
like,
growing.
Yeah.
I was like, is he going to drop
Like,
it,
should I
or-
drop this news here on the podcast?
Go do that.
But yeah, don't tell anyone out in the office yet.
I mean,
We'll
it's
tell them
about to
later.
be
It's about to be
live on the
that's-
It's gonna be
interweb.
live today.
Don't tell them until
Damn it.
4 o'clock this
Damn it.
afternoon.
This is a good way to check if our employees,
We wanna see-
our
Yeah.
co-workers listen.
See who else is working at Composite. Do not say anything, guys, in this room.
That is
Let's see who's
so
listening.
good.
That's a good one.
But yeah,
Oh my
so
God,
we're
congrats. That's super
so
exciting.
We are, 2 adults, 2 kids at the moment. It's about to be car baby number 3,
Car baby.
and we need some space.
Aw.
So that's what's going
Love
on
it.
there.
What a
Love
note to end on. I can't even say anything after that. That is the
Whoa.
most exciting.
What is your preference?
Yeah, good point.
I can't follow
Trying to
that.
get out
How'd
of
you
this
get
one.
out of this?
I
I
should've
can't
asked.
follow that.
Why'd you ask me, Jason?
No, okay. Well,
Because it's situational, right? Like
No,
I think
no,
we've
of
established
course.
today, it's
I
forget the
think
affordability. It's situational.
I think for us right now, we my partner and I want to buy a home. We want to have a family and raise kids in. And we both grew up in houses with, backyards and pools and, green space that was very important to us. So we definitely want, I can't really visualize my kids' childhood without that. But I think since the last few years, we have been living in apartments. We meet lots of young families that live in these apartments alongside us, and they have a great life and their kids love it. And, the convenience factor at this point in my life right now where I'm, pouring myself into my career and I'm, taking on other, sort of side hobbies and hustles and things like that. Having a place that is very convenient to live, is near the train, is easy to maintain and upkeep is really suiting me. So I think right now, apartments, when I am looking at starting a family and wanting to give them that space I had, it might shift again. But yeah, right now I'm happy in a smaller space.
And I think the moral to the
And
story
it
is
feels safe too. It feels really safe,
Yeah, it
which I
does.
think is important.
Yeah.
If you're home, safety is a factor. So
I think the
Sorry.
moral is
We can touch on that. That's a good point there.
yeah,
for
Yeah,
us.
that's
another-
a
I
really
think the moral. I think the moral.
hang on, piped out.
Hey,
You've had your
no,
moment.
But the
I
moral,
think-
the
I
moral,
think-
the moral.
I think the time's
the
up.
moral. But no.
Time's up.
Would you look at that?
No,
All right.
no. Here's
right.
what it's going to be like with 3 kids, isn't it?
Yeah.
But so all of us have had different answers,
Yeah.
but all of them are correct, right?
Yeah.
And again, it comes down to your personal circumstance.
Yeah,
So
I'd go both. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like,
the
depending on
Penola
your-
styles, yeah, we said it.
Take it out the affordability question. You could definitely go both, depending on where you are in that stage of your life.
Love it.
Cool.
All right, guys. Well, congratulations, Carboni families.
Jeez.
Woo!
And thanks so much. See you next week.
Now we actually get
Gang?
to check if Tina listens to the podcast.
Yeah, I know.
The Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only, and they are general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. Always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.